from the time you get a contract. If I'm involved with the I guess that means keep moving. If I'm involved from the get-go, then what I'll try to do is get as much of my financial information from my client together so that when we get an offer, we're ready to roll. But usually 60 days from the time of a submitted package, you should be hearing something back with another 30 days to close. Be patient, have realistic expectations. Almost all short sales will close if they're handled properly and you allow enough time. Expect frustrations and setbacks. I kind of tell war stories at the very beginning to people and tell them, you know, you're going to be aggravated. You're going to be asked to provide things you provided 3 times, but, you know, this is their game. We have to jump through their hoops. And again, this has gotten better. When we first started doing short sales 3 and 4 years ago, it was awful how often things were misplaced, but it's gotten better. That deficiency waiver is the jackpot. It is worth, you know, lots and lots and lots of money to your client or your borrower. So it is worth this aggravation. If somebody told you had to, you know, put 2 months of time into putting together some documents to get $100,000, I know we would all be signing up to do that. And that's basically what they're getting, and, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases in debt forgiveness of money they don't have to pay back. So it's definitely worth doing. Deed in lieu of foreclosure is an alternative to a short sale. It's usually only available to a borrower if they've tried to sell the property and have been unsuccessful. Why are you unsuccessful? You know, that you may have some issues with the property. Say the property has got a mold issue or a radon issue. That may be something that you can't really cure. Your borrower doesn't have the money to cure. They may be in a situation where a deed in lieu is good, but generally it requires a prior effort to sell the property. It can result in a deficiency waiver if it's half has a short sale and a deed in lieu component. So if it's half a deed in lieu, you're going to get the deficiency waiver. Property can't have liens. So if you've got judgment liens out there, don't think you're just going to pass that off on the lender and they'll be happy to have your tax warrants and your alimony and child support liens, because they don't want that problem either, because ultimately they've got to convey title to this property. So if you've got a lemon from a title perspective, you're not going to be able to do a deed in lieu. And if you're in foreclosure, you can still do a short sale. Don't move out of the property. Make sure that you get legal advice and deal with the foreclosure action. They're 2 separate actions. Your short sale is proceeding down, you know, I say parallel train tracks. Your short sale is on this train track and your foreclosure is on this train track, and whatever train gets to the station first, that's going to be the outcome. So you cannot ignore the fact that you have a legal proceeding, that the lawsuit is pending and a foreclosure is, you know, pending, because the property could literally be sold at the courthouse, you know, the day before your short sale is expected to close, because the servicer is not communicating. The 2 sides of the brain for these massive, you know, servicers and lenders, they don't necessarily communicate with one another. So one side can be approving your short sale and the other side is proceeding to foreclosure. And if you don't tie those ends up and put people in touch with one another and you leave it to them, you will not be happy with the results.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the short sale process from the realtor's perspective. As Francesca said, the short sale process is not short. A lot of realtors who write contracts actually put closing dates and expect the sellers to close on those dates. This is directed more towards the homeowner. The realtors who were in the room, I'm sure you're pretty much aware of that if you've been on the buyer side or the seller side. Everyone involved in a short sale obviously has to have patience. The seller, the buyer, the buyer's agent, the listing agent. It's not It's not going to be an easy process. The banks, as Francesca said, loses paperwork. You're constantly resubmitting updated paperwork, and the seller sometimes gets a little frustrated. But like she said, in the end, it's all worth it, especially if you get the deficiency. So try to have the patience, especially if you're the realtor on the side, with your sellers, because they can get very annoyed. It's very stressful for them. So that's one of the things I've learned. Realtors also, we need to understand our contracts. I think we all know the neighbor contracts have been revised as of June 14th. And what we find is that a lot of the realtors have never really read the entire contract. They know certain parts of it. So it would take time to really understand the contract. Know that there's a short sale, addendum, and as-is addendum. You know, there's FAR bar. There's all different kinds of contracts. So depending on the contract that you're going to work with, make sure you know those contracts. On the short sale addendum, I agree with Francesca. I believe that 60 to 120 days is really more logical when it comes to writing that time frame in there, just to give yourself enough coverage on it. Or else you're going to be constantly going back for addendums, and then the buyer may or may not sign those. So it's just tell the buyer up front, you're going to get a great deal, but you need to be patient. One of the things that we always do, and one of the things you said, Francesca, was in the contract we always try to ask for a deposit. A lot of the realtors fight us on that because they don't want their buyers to be obligated to put $1,000, $5,000 down on a short sale. But you go through the whole process, your sellers go through the process, you have an attorney negotiating it, you get the approval letter, you're ready to close, you've been talking to them, you call the buyer's agent, and they say, oh, they bought another property. You have nothing to hold their feet to the fire. So as a listing agent, I strongly suggest that, and I hope the attorneys agree, that you put some type of money in escrow if you're the buyer placing an offer on a short sale. It helps the seller, it helps you, it helps the buyer. They're not out shopping. The first thing that my partner and I do when we visit a homeowner who has asked us to come talk to them about listing their property is ask their intention. Do you want to keep the property? Should be the first question that we ask. And in our cases, we've run across a lot of people who really do. And Michael, that you heard speak first, is a great resource. I usually back off if I know that that's their true intention. You know, you direct them to the right agency. If not, then, you know, direct them to their attorneys and so forth. And a lot of times the attorneys will forward them on to you. You'll work closely with their attorney. If not, if they can't afford an attorney, we have, you know, obviously legal aid. I've used legal aid many times when, you know, the situation is complicated. And I think the most important part, and there's a lot of parts to this as realtors that, you know, that we run into, and it's for the homeowners, it's very emotional, and I think for the realtors who are all in this room that work short sales, you really get close after a year, sometimes in the beginning when you were talking about the Wild West of short sales. I had one that lasted 4 years. Now, granted, they usually don't last that long now, but we hung with them, and it's a very emotional time. So you really have to keep your sellers on track and your buyers that are working with them on track as well. But one of the things, the sellers, if you're out there, you have to be willing to participate in this. You can't just give the paperwork and then hope that the realtor will do the job. It's not like a traditional sale in a way. You're going to constantly be asked to update paychecks and bank statements and different things. But in the end, it's going to save you a lot of money and a lot of grief. My suggestion to the realtors, if you're doing short sales and the homeowner is just not willing or providing it, that might be a listing that you just say, I can't help you with, and not take it, and refer them to an attorney at that point and see what the attorney can do for them. I think one of the other problems is that we run into with realtors is that we don't price the property right. Yeah, okay, so we're trying to guess on what the bank will take. But you can look at a neighborhood, and even if you price it as the lowest price in the neighborhood, you're pricing it somewhere where probably the bank will take it. It's when you're in a $500,000 neighborhood and you got a property that is probably would have been worth that if it were a traditional sale at one time, and you price it as $200,000. You know you're going to get an overrun of people, multiple offers. The seller's going to just be going crazy, resubmitting offers, and in the end, it's not going to appraise anyway, and the bank's going to come back with an appraised value of what they want, and those buyers are either going to take it, leave it, and you're going to start the whole process over and over again until you get it. I think that one of the things I also ask in all the questions that Francesca mentioned about the different liens that you ask people, I've had people say they want to short sell their property and they're in bankruptcy. So that's a question that we want to ask our homeowners. Now, can we short sell a property in bankruptcy? That's an attorney's question. I have done one with the help of an attorney who went to a bankruptcy trustee. There was no value in the property. She gave her approval, but you can't do it without that trustee's approval. And that's the job of the seller's attorney to get that approval, not the realtor's job. Always, there again, I always ask how many loans do you have on the property, how many credit lines, because some folks don't understand that a credit line can still be attached to a property, so they don't consider that a loan on the home. There's all kinds of technical questions, and I think as realtors sometimes we get caught up in our own terminology. So help the homeowner, explain to them the different types of loans, different terminologies that we use when we start getting into acronyms and so forth. They're scared. They're terrified when the guy knocks on the door and serves them papers that they're going to be out that night. So we're sometimes the first people who meet them. We need to walk them through the process and refer them to the right people. One of the things we find out is some folks get an approval letter from one of the lenders and they think we're ready to close, but all lenders have to approve the HUD, the numbers, and the closing is really mostly set by the lender. We can talk to the lenders about the different dates and so forth, but it's usually going to come from the lender. When final approval is received on all the loans, we really should have their attorneys review those. We've seen realtors read it over and say, oh, don't worry about it, it's pretty vague, they'll never come after you. The approval, the acceptance, the language, the terms, and everything should be explained by the seller, to the seller by their attorney, and not us as realtors. There's a lot of things, different ways that these banks are presenting the approvals that appear one way but may not be another, may not really be that. One of the things that I would like to stress to realtors is that the short sale is just another contingency. Okay, like a mortgage contingency, like an inspection. Granted, it's a little bit more difficult, but it's just a contingency. I think people are taking the short sales and getting overwhelmed and making them into their own little way of doing it and making their own rules. The rules still apply. The information in the short sale addendum just supersedes certain things in our sales contract. So we can't make up our own rules. We just follow the dates, the times. We get price changes in writing. We get extensions on closings in writing. Anything that we negotiate for the buyer and the seller that we want to submit to the bank to consider, it has to be in writing. Just put it on an addendum. It's just like renegotiating an inspection with items that need to be repaired. Only a little bit more legally complicated, although inspections can get complicated as well. The next thing I want to talk about is unlicensed practice of law. I was talking to Francesca before it. I think the realtors, we really want to be educated. We want to know how to help homeowners, and I really think that's our ultimate goal for most. We know what we know, and we try to help people and save them what we think is money and time. We've seen recently where some realtors have gone to court in the actual courtroom for the homeowner. We can't go to court. There was an attorney in there that was, I guess, doing a check on unlicensed practice of law. That was his job, and there was a realtor in there. And we can get a lot of trouble for that. So don't go to court. Don't ask for extensions. Don't ask for anything. You know, don't go to, please don't do a foreclosure on my seller. We're so close on a short sale. You can't do that. Never go into that courtroom for your seller. Do not prepare any responses. The 20-day response when they get served notice of their lis pendens. Any type of document, you can't prepare those. That's why we have real estate contracts with little lines to fill in. That's all we're supposed to do. Never give the legal advice, and tax advice has been stated. Never give your advice or opinion on any document from a lender or anyone else on any type of final approval. Even some issues within the contracts, we may want to refer to the attorneys. You know, it gets complicated. We each have our own opinion of what we read in the contracts. So that's a negative. So what can we do? We can list and sell short sale properties. Our job is to do the following, and I'm going to read it because I found it. To do fact-finding, gather information and documents, transmit the documents to the property owner's lender or to the attorney, whoever is, you know, negotiating it, the approval of the short sale. Realtors who are simply negotiating and the transmittal of information from one party to another without evaluating, advising, or giving their opinion are not practicing law. And my last advice is, if you have any questions and on what to do, and you think you're going to go into that courthouse, call and go to an attorney first. Don't do it. So there's a lot to short sales, but that's just a few of the things that we'd like to stress this evening.
I'm Pat Neale, and to my left is Ed Larsen, and we're attorneys, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about some of the issues that involve what we're calling the end game. And really, we're starting out with the question of what to do about your house: the good, the bad, and the ugly. End games, myths, and the condo HOA problem. As part of that, we're going to talk about end games, and what I'd like to remind everybody, Michael had brought this up earlier, is this is all going to be posted on the collierftf.com website. So there's going to be some slides that have a bit more information on them than probably they should for a presentation like this, but you can take them and print them out and read them later. So try not to, you don't have to take notes and memorize everything as we're going through it. First thing we're going to talk about a bit is, what if I just walk away? What are the ramifications? What can happen to you? And, you know, we all hear the myths of, well, my neighbor walked away and nobody ever came after him and everything's fine and he's bought a new house 2 weeks later. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. As that's part of that, we're going to talk about myths and urban legends. We're also going to talk about foreclosure, which is sort of the ultimate end game, what it is and how it works, and how to involve yourself in it if you are the subject of foreclosure or if you're advising someone on a foreclosure. Talk about the pre-litigation process, what goes on during the process, and what can happen to you after the judgment is entered, if it is. We're going to talk a bit about asset protection, how to protect your assets from judgment should that judgment happen in a legal and proper way. Going to talk about what happens potentially to your credit rating from all of the various aspects, be it a short sale, a deed-in-lieu, or the foreclosure itself. We're going to talk then some about condos and HOAs, what condo and HOAs, homeowners associations, should do and to protect themselves, and also what you can do as a homeowner in dealing with the condo association or the homeowners association. The first is, what's a foreclosure? A foreclosure is a process whereby the lender files a lawsuit to enforce their lien, known as the mortgage, on your property, and to collect the money that you agreed to pay them. The thing that everyone needs to remember is at the beginning, when you signed all these papers, you agreed to pay a certain amount of money, and you still have a legally binding debt that you signed for. If you can, the bank is willing to make a change to that debt. That's something that the bank is doing because they're willing to, or because there's a government program motivating them. The underlying legal document still says you owe them about that amount of money, and they can take your house if you don't pay it back. The next slide that you see up there is myths and urban legends. This is the one that's absolutely impossible to read, so I don't expect anybody to try and read it. But it's the one that's good to read on the website. One of the myths we talk about, and was talked about a little bit earlier, is if I short sell, give a deed-in-lieu, or abandon my home, the bank takes care of the balance owed, and there's no tax consequence for me. Well, the previous speakers talked a little bit about that issue. The bank can come after you for the balance owed. They may waive it, they may not. And there may be tax consequences, all of which you need to go and talk to a professional about. The one that I hear probably more than any and have heard over the past several years is the bank lost the note. That means I don't owe them any money, right? That's not true. There is a provision in Florida law that allows them to prove that they at one time had that lost note and that they can have found that lost note. And so in the vast majority of the cases, even if they lost the note, they're still going to be able to enforce the mortgage against you. The one that was talked about a little bit before is if I got served, so should I move right now? Well, no. Florida is not a non-judicial foreclosure state. It's what's called a judicial foreclosure state. There is a court process that goes through. But don't ignore the process. As the previous speakers talked about, if you get served, file a response to that lawsuit. It's a lawsuit just like any other. If you don't file a response, it moves a lot faster and they can get a judgment against you. One of the other ones is the myth that is prevalent is, and you hear it on TV ads all the time, file bankruptcy, you can keep your house. Well, maybe. That's a absolutely uncontradicted maybe. You may or may not be able to keep your house in bankruptcy. It depends on the type of bankruptcy you filed, what your situation is, how far behind you are on your loan, and frankly, whether the bank is willing to go along with it to some extent. So yes, you may be able to, but you need to contact a bankruptcy professional, bankruptcy attorney professional, to discuss whether that is possible in your particular situation. The other one that we've just heard about is a lot of people think, well, Florida is a state where they don't come after you for deficiency judgments. Yes, they do, and they can, and they probably will. The other one that Francesca talked about is if you're negotiating a modification, that stops the other process. Well, not necessarily. In fact, it doesn't even stop the litigation. Certain types of modification programs will stop the bank from selling the property, but they don't necessarily stop the litigation. A short sale or foreclosure doesn't affect my credit rating. The infamous they passed something that took care of that. Well, yes, it does, and it will, and Ed's going to talk about that a little bit more. The one that I know the realtors always like me to talk about is if I cancel the short sale because I don't like the terms, the realtors have no claim for commission. Well, maybe they do. It all depends on your listing agreement and how the realtor is protected. So the realtor may have a claim for commission, even if you walk away from a short sale because you just didn't like the terms. And then, of course, it's best to wait to negotiate with the bank until they've started to foreclose. No. The next slide will tell you what you want to do is respond. And this is the next part, to talk a little bit about, before the suit is filed, what to do and what happens. Certain lenders, particularly the government lenders like Fannie and Freddie, are offering pre-suit mediation now. That means there's a formalized process where you actually get to sit down with a mediator and representatives from the bank and try and work out an arrangement. That process is more or less successful depending on the cooperation of both the bank and the borrowers. So it's a process that may work. But you're also going to start getting letters from the lender. You'll get phone calls, of course, and that's the time that you use caller ID probably. But what you also are going to get is you're going to get a bunch of letters from the lender. Respond to these correspondences. Let them know that you're involved. Let them know you're interested. Silence is a vacuum, and bad things go into a vacuum. So make sure that you respond before the demand letter, because there's several different types of letters. You're going to get these, I've noticed that you're late on your payment. I'm sure you just made a mistake. Please send us your check. And then you get the, hey, bozo, you're not sending me any money. And then you get the harder and harder letters coming forward. Respond to these letters. Let the bank know what's happening. Talk to them. You're going to get a demand letter at some point, probably from the law firm for the bank. Respond to that, and there's a specific 30-day requirement to respond for that letter.